I'm going to go ahead and start with Shaylin Turney.
Hi, it's Shaylin, and I'm with Project More, and we work with the special needs population, and I'm the director at Project More. Nice to see you all.
Nice to see you, Shaylin. Thank you for joining us this morning. And next, I have Donna Gillette.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you. I work with Easter Seals Blake Foundation, and I'm an associate director, and I work closely with Mandy, who is now overseeing the transportation programs. We've been doing transportation for seniors and individuals with developmental disabilities and for many, many years. And so it's a joy to be part of this group.
Yes.
Thank you, Donna. We're glad to have you this morning. And John Hawbaker.
Hello, this is John Hawbaker, working for the town of Oro Valley, transit crew leader. And with me also is Michael Alexander, senior transit crew leader for the town of Oro Valley.
Thank you. Good morning, John. Good morning, Mike. Meg Knight.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Meg Knight. I am the grant writer with the Tucson Jewish Community Center. Renee Stevens and Josh Schenker are also part of our team. The JCC has a day program for young adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We currently have about 50 people in that program, and that program is served by this grant.
Great. Thank you, Meg. Roger Early.
Hello, everyone. This is Roger Early. I am the Transportation Facilities Manager for Savvy Services for the Blind, the nonprofit training center for the blind here in Tucson.
Thank you, Roger. Mandy Hendricks.
Good morning. Mandy Hendricks with Easter Seals Blake Foundation.
Mandy, good morning.
Good morning.
Okay. Just going to look to see if I'm missing anyone else that might have joined while we were doing some of the introductions. So bear with me just a moment here. I think that's it. Did I miss anyone? Is anyone on the call maybe joining someone in the office and I'm just not seeing their name appearing? Anyone dialing in by phone? Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and move forward with the rest of the items on the agenda. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and discuss the InKind form. Most of us on the call are probably relatively familiar with InKind. So for this meeting, we are going to be collecting InKind. And on the slide on the screen, it shares a little bit about how our regional planning efforts are enhanced by recording the time of people who participate in these meetings and how we collect the data on the time invested in the activities that apply and how it translates into matching funds. So one important element is that if your salary or position is paid for by federal dollars, please let us know that because we cannot count your time towards InKind. So if you could send me an email saying that we should not count you for InKind, that would be helpful to me to make sure that we account for it properly. You'll still get credit for attending this meeting as far as your coordination efforts, but we just can't count your time towards our InKind. So thank you for that. All right, we're going to go ahead and move to the next item on the agenda. And I know the grant cycle seems so far away when we talk about the fiscal year 2023 grant cycle, but as you're probably aware, time moves very quickly most of the time, and it will be here before we know it. So I would like to try to take advantage of of this year in helping all of our potential applicants prepare well for that grant cycle when it does come around in around early February of next year. And one of the things that we definitely have to do this year is to begin identifying potential projects, meaning what people might be applying for funding for, because those potential projects will need to be identified in our coordinated plan, and we will need to have time to put those in our coordinated plan and have it go through our internal process. So planning around those timeframes will be an important consideration. And with that, I want to make sure that you have enough time to be able to give some thought to what you might be applying for. So this way there's no surprises, so to speak, when we go to ask for those potential projects to be listed into our coordinated plan. So please make a note of that as we move forward in this year, probably around early May, maybe even June, somewhere around that time frame, we might start to lean in a little bit more heavily on asking you to identify those potential projects so that we can begin to prepare for including them in our coordinated plan. And we'll be talking about it more. So I'm sure there's some questions that'll come with that, and we'll walk through those accordingly as we get a little bit closer, but I at least wanted to plant a seed of awareness around that so that we can make the most of our time together in future meetings, but also just to acknowledge that's something that we're going to need to be working on in the months ahead. And I think I can hear a little bit of feedback from someone's mic. So if you could just double check and make sure that your mic is off unless you're going to speak, it'll help to minimize feedback and background noise. So I appreciate that. I can hear pages turning sometimes, and I know some people are working from home and dogs can bark and whatnot. So it'll just help with that. So thank you. So with the identification of projects, like I shared, we'll lean into that a little bit more in the months ahead, but I wanted you to kind of have a little opportunity to make a note of that so that when we do talk about it, it's not something new. So grant application consideration. So when we reflect back on previous grant cycles, especially the most recent one, and I say that in a way that makes sense because some folks did not participate in the last grant cycle. So they're trying to kind of revisit back to a previous grant cycle. For some of us, the grant cycle is probably a little bit more fresh in our minds. So grant application considerations is what I'm referring to in terms of some opportunities to grow or improve our efforts as applicants for this competitive grant. And for those that did not apply this past grant cycle, it's been a little bit since you've applied. And so being able to kind of sharpen your saw and understand what's expected in the grant application obviously is going to be front and center. But even if you did apply in recent time, there's always opportunities for improvement and to make your applications stronger. So I wanted to kind of talk through some things that kind of stood out to me in reviewing past applications, not just from this recent grant cycle, but even previous grant cycles. And we can use that to kind of have a dialogue about what things we'd like to kind of work on together to improve our abilities as applicants. And then of course, discuss a potential webinar, if you will, to kind of do almost some training on how to strengthen your grant application, if that's something that you feel would be of value. So some of the things that kind of stood out to me when looking at previous grant applications is the project summaries, if you will, when you're describing your project. And I know there's kind of two places where you can describe your project, and one is very brief, and one you get a little bit more space or permissions to write a little bit more of a detailed overview of your project. So those two spaces should kind of work in tandem. So when you have your brief project summary, where you only really have about 5 or 6 sentences, that's your opportunity to really draw attention to what the reader of your application is going to see in the larger section. So you want it to be 5 really powerful sentences that kind of set the reader up for success in understanding what they're going to read later. So for example purposes, if you are applying for, let's say, a vehicle, right? Something that would be helpful in the brief summary is giving the reader some quick insights as to how that vehicle will be used, meaning what's its primary mission, if you will. And then also, what is the goal for that vehicle? If it's like a replacement, what type of vehicle is it replacing? And so one way to make it easy for the person who's reading your application to understand the need for that vehicle is obviously to explain how it's going to serve, but also the vehicle that it's potentially replacing. So giving the VIN number of the vehicle that it's going to replace, the mileage of the vehicle that it's going to replace. You can even forecast out, right, at the time that the vehicle would, in theory, be awarded. We anticipate the mileage to be at X, Y, and Z. That's helpful. And of course, the current year or age of the vehicle. So if it's 10 years old, 15 years old, et cetera, or at the time of replacement, you could speak to that as well. So those are some helpful pieces. Some agencies do really well in speaking to all of those. Some agencies only speak to a few of them. So I would encourage you to identify ways that you can make both sections as strong as possible and make it easier for the people that are reading your application to really have a strong sense of the why behind needing that vehicle, under that example, and how it will serve. And keep in mind that a lot of times some of the folks that are reading the grant applications, their understanding of transportation might be less than other panelists, but also they may not necessarily be as acutely aware of your programs or what you do or how you serve. So sometimes when you read your application, it makes sense to you because you live it every day. But would it make sense to someone who has never stumbled across the work that you do in our region and really doesn't have a lens for it? Would they really be able to understand it? And so if you can speak to it in a way that someone who knows nothing about either transportation or your particular organization, if they can really understand it well, it will definitely help the reader of your application have a stronger sense of what you're applying for and why you're applying for it. Just makes their job a lot easier, and also by proxy can make your application potentially stronger. So some considerations around that. Just a helpful reminder, DUNS numbers and things of that nature that are kind of in that prerequisite of applying. You want to make sure that they don't expire and that they're, of course, registered. Sometimes they can expire just before a grant application window opens, and there's a process to getting them renewed. And you don't want that to be kind of your story where you're trying to figure out how to get all those pieces in place while still filling out your grant application and meeting those deadlines. So be mindful of that. Check on that type of information. Make sure you know when yours might expire or is scheduled to expire, so you can keep those pieces up to date. Another thing that I've noticed in grant applications with regard to different types of projects, for example, would be for preventive maintenance. So within the grant application, oftentimes it'll ask you to share how you came up with those cost calculations, right? So if you're asking for $5,000 of preventive maintenance, how did you come to $5,000? Or if you asked for $10,000, how did you come up with $10,000? The more detail that you can offer in how you came up with that calculation, the better. So you want to have obviously really strong preventative maintenance records for how you're taking great care of your vehicles. Use those documents as your resource to be able to identify what have you been spending historically on preventive maintenance to take care of vehicles, and use that for a very accurate forecast or calculation for what you might be applying for in your grant request, and speak to that. A lot of applications will just refer to in general terms saying, this will help maintain our fleet with oil changes or lift maintenance, but they're not necessarily speaking to the details of it. So lift maintenance on average costs us X for this number of vehicles, or in order to do these types of preventive maintenance elements, and kind of listing them out, on average it costs us X. And really using that to speak to, this is how we came up with that number, and here is how it will help us maintain our fleet. In the same breath, a lot of times the application will ask, how will those monies help to extend the useful life of that particular vehicle? And again, if you can look back on your preventive maintenance records and really use the data from that to speak to that particular question, you're strengthening your application. A lot of applicants will just say, well, it'll help us keep our fleet on the road and it'll allow us to serve more people. While those statements are true, it doesn't give you necessarily a kind of a competitive advantage, if you will, against other applicants who might be presenting those numbers and be able to speak to it more fully. So in order to be the most competitive, the more information that you can provide to show that you know how the money will be well spent or well invested in our region, the better off you could potentially be. So I would encourage you to use the information that you have from having done your preventive maintenance as a strength and your ability to convey your needs in your grant application. So with that, I would like to get kind of some feedback from you in terms of different areas of the grant application that either you found challenging and you would like perhaps some more guidance around, or just some specific elements of the grant application that you feel would have some merit if we were to do some kind of supplemental training or a webinar to help individuals do well in the grant application in terms of completing it. Well, what might be some of those topics so that we can give some thought to that. What I would like to do is kind of take some notes on some of your feedback, some of your thoughts, maybe do a doodle poll. Dare I say a doodle poll? I feel like I send a lot of those out, but if I were to send out a doodle poll, then I could kind of get a sense of for all the folks that are obviously here today on this call, but also those that for whatever reason weren't able to make it, get their feedback on those particular topics. And then we could perhaps pick, the top 2 or top 3 and really invest some time on the topics that would add the most value to all the individuals in our group. So I'm just going to kind of open up the floor for thoughts or considerations around that.
Janine, this is John McDowell.
John, how are you?
Good. Once I get into the grant itself, I don't usually have too much trouble, but I always struggle. And even when we did the RTAP reimbursement, I had to poke around forever to get to the right place to put in for the RTAP reimbursement. And when I first start the grant, it seems like I poke around a lot before I finally get to where I need to be. So I suppose maybe what I'm saying is a little short session on just getting launched.
Maybe there needs to be like a table of contents.
You're muted. And Jean, I don't know if you're muted or not, but I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. No one wants to lip read this morning. I apologize. So what I was saying was I could hear the words table of contents, but I missed what preceded the words table of contents.
Oh, I was just talking about in eGrants itself. I have trouble at the very start always. I always poke around forever here and there and this and that, trying to get to the right place. But once I get into eGrants, I usually don't have much trouble actually writing the grant. A lot of it was because of your good tutelage too, and being prepared properly and the right words and things to put in. But it always seems like I have trouble at the very start, just getting to the right place to launch my eGrant application. And also, even with the RTAP that we recently had to do for the upcoming conference, I poked around for a long time before I got to the right place to get the RTAP submitted properly. So it seems like that's maybe something where just the launching of it might be helpful.
Janine, you're still muted.
I'm sorry, I'm a little too quick on hitting mute, apparently. So I wrote that down, and we'll see how we can make it easier, both on the navigation of RTEP reimbursements, which is, separate from the grant application, of course, but they are both via e-grants. So we want to acknowledge that. But definitely with regard to e-grants as it pertains to the grant application, we can see how we can make that easier to navigate. Anyone else?
Hi, Janine, it's Shaylin and Project Amore. I agree with John. It seems, but I'm not on e-grants all that much. So I just figured I just need more practice, but it seems like I kind of struggle a little finding where I need to go, and just, I don't know why it doesn't always stick in my memory, but I poke around a lot too. But like I said, I just figured it was probably because I'm not on it very often, so maybe needing more practice. But it was nice to know that I'm not the only one that feels kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing here. So thank you, John, for sharing that. So, but
Well,
I
I think
agree.
e-grants is relatively new in different spaces. So like for RTAP, which is not really the scope of this conversation, but since it was mentioned, RTAP this year is the first time we've actually used e-grants for reimbursements. So I know that in its own space is brand new for everyone. But in the span of time that 5310 as a competitive grant's been around, e-grants is still relatively new. So depending on how many times you've applied for funding since its inception, if you will, of e-grants, I think everyone's still kind of on their learning curve. So I don't think anyone's really alone in that, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Anyone else? Thank you, Shaylin.
It's Shaylin again. Just one more little thing so sometimes we're kind of behind when we're balancing our books. And so it was really hard for me on eGrants to find something that kind of showed the payments that were made out for the reimbursement for the preventative maintenance things. And so I ended up going through, I can't remember who at the ADOT, and they were able to send me like a printout of those warrant numbers, even though they were on the check, because I get checks from a lot of other state agencies. So I didn't, and I couldn't find anywhere in eGrants where you could actually see the actual amount that was paid in, or if it was all paid together, or if they were separate payments. So that was just kind of something too. But I did get my answer, but I just had to go through ADOT, and she was able to send me like a little screenshot of the different payments. So which added up the amount I was looking for on my bank statement. So but it took a couple months because, we're always behind a couple months anyway. So, but just that was another little thing that I don't think they showed that on eGrants. So when you're putting in, I would like next year, I would definitely like take a screenshot of that reimbursement screen. So, but it kind of didn't matter because it was all deposited at once, because I kind of did it all at once. So it was all one check. So, it was 4 checks, but they were all deposited at the same time. So
I understand what you're saying. Okay, well, I wrote that down, and I'll chat with ADOT about that and see if there's anything we could do to make that process easier, especially if you're going to use that type of information for any elements that might be helpful in your grant application. So I'm trying to make sure that I stick to the scope of this being about the grant application, because that's what's on our agenda. So I have to
Oh,
make
I'm
sure that I
sorry.
don't deviate into other topics because it's not on the agenda and this is a public meeting. So, or a meeting that's open to the public, I probably should say it like that.
Okay,
So I understand it's interrelated. So I want to find that right balance, but
okay.
as far as
Sounds
talking
good.
about it more fully, I can't really do that. Yeah. But we
Okay.
could talk about it offline for sure, Shaylin.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So with regard to elements for the grant application and elements that you find potentially challenging or perhaps just could benefit from some additional guidance or direction around. And that doesn't mean that you don't feel like you do it well right now. It just might mean that you just want to kind of affirm that what you perceive to be your strengths really are your strengths, or if there's anything else that you can do to make your application even stronger. Anything in that space, if there's any topics that you feel would be of value, or maybe you can remember a time at a particular area was, challenging for you and something that would be helpful for your applicants to keep in mind. Any of those pieces I would welcome some feedback on, just so that we can make the most of our time and add value to the conversation for all of the individuals that are in the group. Or even just general questions about, what type of topics you'd like to entertain being offered as a potential webinar of training. So I will say that this coming grant cycle in 2023, I mean, much like every other grant cycle, they're always a competitive grant cycle. We anticipate that there'll probably be more applicants this coming cycle than there was this most recent. So in 2023, I think that's two reasons. One is we didn't have as many applicants from rural areas this past grant cycle as we've had historically. So we anticipate that there'll be more rural applicants this coming grant cycle. And the other piece is there is a potential that we might see more funding available this coming grant cycle than we had this past one, depending on how all of the different bills play out. But if either of those are true, we could definitely say that there'll likely be more applicants for this competitive grant. So it just affirms or reiterates the importance of having a really strong grant application. And so really want to make whatever training we have available to you something that's of value to you. So this is a great opportunity for you to kind of give me some insights as to what you think would be of value to your organization, so I can make sure it's included. And of course, I want to include it in the doodle polls for those that aren't on the call today, so that they can still have a voice in that. But you would have the opportunity to at least speak to it firsthand in terms of topics that you think would be of value. So I'm just going to open it up a little bit longer for any potential topics, and then we'll move on to the next topic of discussion on the agenda. Okay, I'm going to take that as everybody's kind of shared what they're wanting to share at this moment, or can't really think of anything else. So, and that's okay. Maybe more ideas will come to mind in the days ahead, and you can definitely share those with me via email or through the doodle poll. I'm comfortable with each approach, or you can even call me. Either one's fine. So we will move on to the aspect of the potential webinar. If there is a time frame that you think would be helpful, I will include those options in the doodle poll. So that's something that I will also be asking for feedback on. So for the next topic. It's regional driver training and recruitment needs in our region. So this is a topic that I thought would be important to at least take a closer look at. Across our region, there have been shifts in driver availability, meaning their schedules. Some drivers have resigned. There's just different reasons for different types of driver shortages, and different ways that organizations have bridged that gap or are trying to bridge the gap on driver shortages. And I know everyone kind of has their own pain points with that, and also everyone has their own thoughts and processes in place for how they're trying to address that. But I thought it makes sense to at least talk about it in twofold. One is, what are some training elements that would add value to your drivers, period? You know, the ones that you have in place and are, you know, doing great work for you. But also, what are some driver training elements that would add value to future drivers, right, as well? And perhaps even some of those offerings might be a great recruitment tool, if you will, meaning people would see value in this particular training offering and would want to come and work for your organization as opposed to an organization that isn't offering that kind of a training. And then, of course, what are the opportunities to work together, right? Coordination of efforts for recruiting drivers. You know, is there an opportunity to work together to recruit drivers? And so, again, every organization has different budgets, different methodologies of how they're addressing this. But I know sometimes there's individuals that are looking for full-time work, but maybe an organization can't fill a full-time position. All they can offer is part-time. So maybe there's two organizations that can offer part-time, and by proxy, that person now has full-time work. So there's just different things that we can look at potentially to see if there's an opportunity to coordinate for recruitment efforts. And I thought we could at least kind of throw that out there to you and see what your thoughts are. See if there's something that you would want to kind of link arms with someone else around to try and recruit drivers. So I'm going to open it up first for training needs. And again, training needs can be for existing drivers, but also for future drivers. It takes a while to put a training together for drivers. So I want to make sure that we're asking the question early on in the year, even if the need for the training doesn't manifest until several months down the road, because it might take us that long just to even plan it and put it together. So now's the time to ask that question. So as a reminder, since we are talking about training needs, there's a past training that had gotten sent out for March 25th. I believe all the slots for that particular training are now full. However, if you still have an interest in sending someone and you hadn't already submitted their names, you can still send their names to me, and we can put them on a wait list. And if there's enough names on that wait list, we might actually be able to do 2 classes, but it would take some additional coordination, but at least we could see what's possible. Usually try to keep a class to about 10 participants. So if we had 8 or 9 people on the wait list, so to speak, we probably could make an argument to figure out how to make 2 classes relatively back to back. However, if it's only like 2 or 3 people on a wait list, that might be a different conversation. So again, if you have people that you'd like to send to it, but for whatever reason you hadn't sent me their names, let's definitely talk about that particular training need. Some of the other training needs that you've seen probably go out via email is about accident prevention. And we gave kind of a breakdown of the different modules, if you will, from the Town of Oro Valley's accident prevention program. And again, it's not a replacement of past training. A lot of you do have your own accident prevention type trainings, but perhaps there's a particular module within Town of Oro Valley's that's unique to yours, and perhaps you'd like to add that component into some of your existing trainings, or you'd like to send some of your drivers to that particular component. These are all different types of efforts of coordination, and I'd like for us to make the most of those types of opportunities. Other organizations, based on staffing and budgets, don't have the ability to conduct these types of trainings on their own, and they find value in being able to send their drivers to trainings that are in motion. And so one of the things that we are talking through right now is what is the need for that type of training, and how many people are interested in sending drivers. And we've gotten a lot of great feedback. It's actually now being discussed at the very early stages of a potential training at the ASTA conference, which is going to take place here in Oro Valley. So again, it's just tentative at this point. We're still talking things through. There's lots of decisions that still need to be made as to whether or not that will be one of the actual offerings, but it just shows that we are working through that as a potential offering. So if you're interested in sending drivers to that and you haven't answered the doodle poll that I sent you, please try to find it and answer it, or just send me an email and I'll add it to my existing records from that original doodle poll. Either way is sufficient. So other types of training needs that you're seeing for your drivers, that's where I would welcome your feedback, your thoughts, so that we can figure out what types of training should we be planning for the remainder of the year. So I'm just going to open it up for discussion and let you give me some thoughts or considerations. I'm going to do my best to remember that I put myself on mute. So here we go.
Hi, Janine. This is John from the town of Oro Valley.
Hi, John.
Hi. So we are go on providing the training at the ASDA conference if it's desired. I just was finalizing some stuff with our town attorney to make sure that we would be legal in what we were sharing, and we will be. So we're good. We had 3 different segments, and any one of the 3 or all 3 or whatever is decided is fine with us.
Okay, great. That's really great news. I'm excited to hear that. And I will definitely share that with ASTA, and I'll copy you and Michael so that everybody's in the loop as we begin to coordinate that. So thank you so much for offering that and sharing it with the group, but also working hard on making it available potentially for the ASTA conference. So I appreciate that. So any other thoughts or considerations that we should be taking note of for types of training for our drivers? All right, I'm going to ask a different question, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know, right? So depending on the different types of driver training that you've been exposed to, shape what you feel like you need or don't need. But in the same breath, if you've never heard of a particular training, you wouldn't necessarily know to ask for it. So what I might do is ask a different question and have people kind of share the different types of driver trainings that they offer their drivers currently, or even ones that they are working on offering in the future, so that those that might have smaller programs, they might hear one of those word choices and say, oh, that would be fantastic. We need that. And then that might be an easier way for them to say what they need. So let's try that approach. So I'm actually going to put some people on the spot. So forgive me in advance for doing that. So I'm going to start with Donna Gillette and Mandy Hendricks, and maybe either of you could kind of share different types of trainings that you offer your drivers, past and even in the future, so that people can hear that, and then maybe we would get some feedback by proxy. So I'll start with Donna and Mandy, and either of you, if you want to speak to that, that'd be great.
Hi, this is Donna. Well, we've we've had our own pass trainer. So,
Uh-huh.
you know, we are able to offer pass training to our drivers. And several years ago, we had put together a really good driver's handbook that we use for training, and it gives them all the information about, you know, our policies and everything for the agency. Currently, we're in the process of updating that so that it'll be even better for our new staff coming on board. And then we have our own training department, and they do some real specific driver trainings and videos. And then we also have the hands-on, of course, and the gentleman who's been our past trainer does hands-on. And I think the one thing that we really want to really try to impress with new drivers, especially on the larger vans, is really how to use the lifts properly, because in the years past that had kind of been an issue off and on. So we do some extra training to make sure that they really are trained well on using how to use the lifts.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And when you said for the hands-on, is that for the scope, is that specifically for the lift? Using the
No, for
lift, or
everything. No, for
everything?
everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing. Anything else? Anyone else? I'm going to pick on Roger. So
I was just going to get on there right now.
you sense me honing in on you, right? Sorry, Roger.
Yes. No, it's all good. I was writing my notes down what I was going to talk about here. So
Okay, perfect.
our training is a little bit different in that all of our employees go through an immersion training. So they get a sensitivity training like no other kind of sensitivity training, where they're wearing shades for 40 hours a week for 3 or 4 weeks, and they go through all sorts of training on blindness skills. And then they get into as our drivers, for our drivers, then we actually approach them and work on their driving. For our drivers in particular, they go through about a 4-hour in service class where they watch videos. We talk about our program. We talk about our training program that we have. We talk about the 5310 program and how everything works, and how all our paperwork that we do, which seems to be a lot for them, how it all combines and works for a reason. And so they understand how 5310 works. We go over the checklist. We go over all sorts of things. We do our hands-on training in the sense that we go driving around with them. I drive around with them. I put in 3/4 cup of water in the cup holder, and they often wonder why I do that. And I explain to them afterwards that, if they spilt water, I've explained to them that they spilt water in there, and it's because they started off too fast, or they slowed down too fast, or they took a turn too fast. And so I kind of harp on with our students, with our drivers, that our clients, they don't see. So when our drivers make abrupt turns, our clients feel it a lot more. Their heads bobbling around. So we just try to be, I have a term that we use here called slow from the go. Every time they start off, they're going slow, and they remain slow. And there's that issues that with the drivers that have those lead feet, that they have to learn how to go slow from the go, basically. So they do those kinds of things. I have a dummy that I put into the cart, and we practice small little evacuations. After they watch those videos on how to evacuate those larger vans, we actually have them pulling the subject out of the rear door, the rear window, depending on which vehicle it is. And so they get a little stress inoculation on those kinds of situations. And they also our full-time drivers, they go through the pass training as well. So that's pretty much our training that we have.
Very good. Thank you. I didn't even know that you did some of those elements. I mean, the water illustration is really powerful. So thank you for sharing that. both great examples, both what Donna Gillette from Easter Seals shared and also from Roger from Savvy shared, of different types of trainings that are being offered in different organizations that maybe now, having heard that sparks an interest, and you can find value in saying, like, how do we incorporate different types of training such as those, or maybe it sparks an idea. You're like, you know what, we could really use is X, right? Whatever that type of training is. So please give some thought to that. And if there are some different types of trainings that you'd be interested in, or partnering with another organization around to add a different layer of training to your drivers, let's talk about that, because it benefits the entire region. It benefits all of the people that we serve, and it's also very demonstratable action in terms of coordination in our region. And so I think that serves us all well. And it's definitely one of the things that gets looked at on the grant application, is what are the efforts that you're doing to coordinate within the region. So those would be great examples. Any other trainings that are being done that you'd like to speak to? Thank you, Roger. I appreciate it. Anyone else have any other trainings that they like to share? I was hopeful, Hope, no pun intended, but I was hopeful Hope was on the call today, because I know that they have a driver assessment tool that they had created a couple years back, if I'm not mistaken. And it's, to give an example, and this is a very loose example, but much like when you come of age and you take your driver's test, the written test, it tells you have to come to a complete stop at the stop sign. And that's a very cerebral, understanding of what is expected. But then you actually have to demonstrate that you're capable of making a vehicle come to a complete stop. And that can look and feel very different, right? Much like what Roger is saying, there's a myriad of ways you can come to a complete stop, but one is very kind and easy on a passenger, and another one isn't, and same with accelerating. So their driver assessment tool, if you will, kind of measures, okay, you understand the textbook knowledge, but now show us how you directly apply it. And they score that sheet, and if they don't hit a certain score, they have to not only retake the test, but they have to be reevaluated. And depending on what elements they didn't do well on, it can be like an immediate, fail, so to speak. So it's a very interesting program. They put a lot of time and work into it. And I was hopeful that they would be on the call and they could speak to that a little bit. But that's another example of a training that they're doing that may be very similar to what you do, or might be a little bit different. And it'd be a nice opportunity to kind of see where you're similar, but also where you different. And are there some opportunities to grow or stretch or improve your existing program? So I thought I'd share that on their behalf, so to speak. Any other comments or questions about different types of training needs in our region, things that we should be thinking about or give some consideration around as we prepare for that?
Hi, Janine. This is Donna again.
Hi, Donna.
The only thing that came to my mind is that, as part of the grant and part of having federal funds, we're all required to have a Title VI policy, which we all do. And if we don't, then when we do the grant, anyone that does a grant will have one. But it's also, it's required that your drivers especially really do understand that policy and know what it's about and what it means. We have to have the signs in our vans to, notify who they would notify if there was an issue. So that's another thing that we're kind of doing a little bit of extra work on, is some additional training around Title VI, so that all of our, not just all of our staff, but all of our drivers especially do understand what that's all about, and, people's rights.
Okay, very good. No, that's perfect. And thank you for sharing that, because much like what you said about the Title VI, it's important for the drivers to understand what that represents and the importance of it, and how it translates, within the program, but also the actual plan that has to be, put together and in place period, but especially for the grant application, if that's not done in alignment with how ADOT wants the Title VI plan to be done, and they have a very specific template that they encourage people to use, that could be a very stressful element to make sure that you're in compliance with that, leaning into the grant cycle. So kind of two-pronged, right? Like making sure you have the right plan in place, but also your drivers understand what that plan represents and what is their responsibility to be in compliance with that. So very good. All right, so I'm going to kind of segue to the last element just in the interest of time, because we have about 9 minutes and some change left over. So the next element on the agenda was about recruitment coordination opportunities, and perhaps, you know, your organization hasn't experienced any driver shortages, or maybe you're an organization that's been significantly impacted by driver shortages. So I'd like to see if there's an opportunity for us to help each other, bridge some of those gaps if there are some gaps in driver shortages, but also if there needs to be some efforts around recruitment, and we can coordinate efforts to help with recruitment across our region, to start having a dialogue around that. So just going to kind of open it up, and you can kind of share what your thoughts are about, you know, either driver shortages or recruitment in general, or recruitment as an opportunity to coordinate. So I'll leave it up to you on what the scope or breadth would be, but that's what I'd like to kind of get some feedback from you. Right, maybe I should ask a better question. Are there any organizations that have been impacted by a driver shortage in any sense of that word, even if they're only down one driver? Like, has any organizations been impacted by driver shortages?
Well,
A concern?
the town of Oro Valley, I think you're aware, has been significantly impacted since September. We've been restricting rides every day because we look at how many drivers we have available the next day, and we cut off reservations sometimes as early as 10 o'clock in the morning for the next day, because we don't have enough drivers to cover the next day. So we've denied thousands of trips.
So Dawn, what do you see as the biggest hurdle with regard to recruiting drivers right now?
What's the problem with recruiting?
We here in the town of Oro Valley have added, I think, 8 drivers in the last 6 weeks. So, and we continue to get applications. Are starting to come in faster now all the time. So we believe we're going to make ourselves whole and well within 6 months or less. But it's been a slow process since the recovery of the society from COVID.
Right.
You know, and people not wanting to work, and a lot of stimulus money allowing them not to work.
Okay.
Hey, Janine, this is
Yeah.
Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Oro Valley. Hello. Yeah, we actually have still on our books 16 new drivers since last March. Of course, we've hired and fired, not fired, but hired, and then some left, back and forth, but we have 16 drivers since last March.
Okay.
So we're still not up to where we were prior to COVID, and they're coming in, but they are, you know, it's slowly coming in, but we're getting them. But one of the things, the reason why we're cutting off reservations, we're doing more trips now than we ever have before COVID. So
wow,
that's another reason why it's tough. So the drivers that we are hiring, they're coming in thinking we're going to have more drivers. We're saying we're part-time, but they're kind of more than just part-time. They're working extra days and all that stuff. So that makes it harder as well.
Okay. So what do you feel that could be a big help or a help from anyone who might want to date or lend a hand in addressing, how do we bridge the gap in, the trips because of the driver shortage, or do you see there as an opportunity there, or?
I think people just are afraid to work maybe, or don't. I mean, I really don't know why people are not working. I mean, I know, since all this started, we're getting the federal money coming in, all this different stuff, but that's kind of ended. So I really don't know what's preventing people from going back to work. I always say, where did all the people go? So I don't know. I really don't know why people aren't back to work.
Okay.
And also, this is John again. Also, I see this as a two-edged kind of thing that I kind of agree with the city of Tucson and the Regional Transportation Authority with the free fares, because we want a robust transportation system in our communities. And so we're trying to get more ridership on SunTrans and some of the other services around town. So I think that it's a wise thing that we're doing with free fares. But it's killing us here in the town of Oro Valley, because our ridership, surpassed what it was pre-COVID. And riders, since it's all free, will take a trip to the bank, and then they'll take a trip to a dollar store, and then they'll take a trip to Safeway, and then they'll go home. And all of these places are within walking distance of each other, when they used to just go to the bank, and then they would have us pick us up at Safeway and go home with just 2 trips instead of 6. So it's free, so why do they care? So we're trying to work with our customers on that and telling them, look, everybody else is getting impacted because of your request for all these extra trips. Maybe you could, tone it down a bit, but, I think it's a two-edged sword, so.
The one that gets me is because there's no recourse if they cancel trips. So you've booked all this time to transport them, and then sometimes they're making these trips, and while they're trying to get their friend to take them. Well, their friend takes, I'll just cancel it. Well, they don't cancel until you knock on the door. Here I am. Oh, I don't need the trip anymore. So we're spending the time to do it, but we're not actually doing it because they're last minute canceling.
Thank you for sharing, Mike and John. Anyone have any thoughts or contributions to that topic at hand with regard to what Town of Oro Valley shared, but also just in general with recruitment opportunities, driver shortages, et cetera? Anyone have any thoughts or considerations? Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and start to close out this meeting. So a couple things is a reminder about if your position is paid for through federal dollars. I can't count your time for InKind, although you still get credit for participating in the meeting. So please send me an email if that is your story, so that we can track that correctly. We'll be sending out a doodle poll of some sorts with regard to topics for the application, grant application training, if you will, and some potential dates if you find value in that, to get your feedback around that. And then another about different types of training topics. And then lastly, try to kind of see if there are some opportunities to help address some of the impact from driver shortages in our region. So I'll give some thought to that and get some feedback on that. And then we should be in a place to kind of figure out what we want to really take a stronger look at in not only in the future meetings that are on our calendar, but also for separate trainings, because we still need to fill in some dates to those specific trainings. And just a quick reminder, like Donna had shared about the Title VI, make sure you have a strong Title VI plan in place. Also an opportunity to make sure that your drivers are aware of what that represents. So thank you so much for investing time today in this meeting. And I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Have a great day, everyone.